There's one business entity that thousands of royalty business owners use to minimize their tax and maximize their profits, and that's a bucket company. But if the bucket company isn't set up and administered properly, you could get into a lot of trouble with the ATO. That's why at my accounting firm, Box Advisory Services, we make sure our clients know all the implications before they set one up. This deep dive is a recording of a coaching session I had with my clients where I cover what a bucket company is and the potential tax benefits, who should and shouldn't consider bucket companies, compliance requirements for bucket companies, and finally, some case studies as well. Let's get into it. A bucket company is an entity, and that entity is set up usually with a family trust or a discretionary trust, and that primary focus of that entity is to receive income or retain profits, and the tax that is taxed on that profit is taxed at 25 to 30% instead of paying the higher individual marginal tax rate, which is usually about 47%. So if you've been living on a rock, tax rates in Australia for individuals is anywhere between 0 to 47%. So 2024 to 2025, it's gone up to any dollar over $190,000 is taxed at 45%, but that doesn't include Medicare levy. So when you include Medicare levy, it's 47%. So it's quite high. And then when it comes to taxes in a company, so when you go to company tax rate and you check the company tax rate, so people get a bit confused. Some people think it's like 27% or 30%. The full company tax rate is 30%. But if you're running a business, and they call it like a base rate entity company tax rate, it used to be called like small business. Now they've changed it to base rate entity. In other words, if you're running a small business, the tax rate is actually 25% from 2022 onwards. So it's actually a very low tax rate. People used to talk about trust and why you should use trust to distribute profits. I would argue that companies are actually better to use to distribute profits. And the reason being is because for you to earn in your personal name $45,000 or more, you're being taxed at 30%. That's how it is in Australia. And because of the cost of living in Australia, and everyone basically needs to earn $1 now. Back then, we had spouses, we had parents, family members that had a very low income, or if not zero income, so that we were able to distribute profits to them. We also had children, minors, were able to receive income up to $10,000, $18,000 when there was no rules about how much minors can actually receive. And so therefore we use family trust to distribute profits. And nowadays, a lot of corporate entities and a lot of small businesses are starting to use not just trust to distribute over to like low income earners, because these days everyone has to earn some sort of income, or they're on Centrelink, or they're on some sort of like social welfare. So as a result of that, they can't actually receive any profits from a family trust. So that's where nowadays bucket companies are used a lot more than usual. When it comes to bucket companies, when should you consider using it? It's not for everyone. It's expensive to run as well, because when you need a bucket company, you need two types of entities. This here is like a structure that we set up for clients. We have like a trading company. This is their main trading company. Let's just say this is Box Advisory Services. Then we have family trust. So I myself will set up a family trust that owns and houses the shares owned by all my companies. So I have another trading company. That trading company might be doing another business, and then I have a bucket company set up like this. So when you can see this, like when we charge and do accounting and taxes for it, you'll see you have to lodge tax return for this company, tax return for this company, tax return for this one, tax return for family trust, and these ones here for me and my wife. So when you look at this, there's like for 6 entities that we need to lodge a tax return for. It gets quite expensive as opposed to having just 2 entities, individual and the trading company. Whereas so this here will cost you $3,000 to $4,000 in fees, whereas this one here could cost you upwards to like 10 to 15 grand per year in terms of fees. So when you think about it, it's actually quite expensive to run using a bucket company. So you have to, it's not suitable for everyone, and you got to time it right, and you got to figure out if it's right for you. Best person to speak to is obviously your accountant, but the good thing is that you're in this chat, so you kind of get an idea of when you need to use it or not. So as I mentioned, let me give you kind of like a list of things that you need to look out for when you want to use bucket companies. First things first, you need to be a business owner or an investor. So you need to invest. You need to have some sort of income that you're generating apart from your wages. So you could work for your own company, but you need to have some income, retained profits, passive income somewhere. And not just a small amount, we're talking about a large amount. And the reason being is because if you are earning only a small amount, you can just distribute the profits to you, your partner, or your kids, or your parents, and just pay the 30% tax rate. If you're on the 30% tax or 37%. There's no point trying to avoid paying 30 or 37%, because in the company, it's 30% tax plus the accounting fees. So it actually gets quite expensive. So
if you don't mind, just in this point, a quick one. When you say large amount, how much you talking about?
That's a good one. Yeah, so that's a good question. I will answer that later, because if I say a number, then you're going to be like, okay, why? I know your answer is going to like, well, explain to me, why that amount. So I'll explain it in the practical examples, which is the next. Property investors make so much money every single year, but barely pay any taxes. Here's why. But first, let's explain how taxes on properties work. You'll be surprised, but many people don't have a clue on how properties can make you more money every single year while reducing the amount of tax you pay every year. Interesting, right? Let's jump right into it. There are generally 2 reasons to buy an investment property in Australia. First, capital growth. The goal is for the price of the house to rise faster than money sitting in the bank. Normally, the bank will pay you interest income on the money you have, and that currently ranges from 3 to 6% in recent years, whereas property prices have had an annual growth of 7 to 15% in recent years. Now that's a big difference. And secondly, rental income. This is pretty self-explanatory. You can receive income when you rent out the property, less the property rental expenses. And if you end up with a rental profit after expenses, this is known as a positively geared property. If you end up with a rental loss after expenses, this is known as a negatively geared property. And conveniently, capital growth and rental income have their own types of taxes. So let's start with rental income and expenses. When you buy investment property, even for the growth, you're probably going to rent it out. This rental income is income and taxed like so. So let's say you're earning $100,000 from the current job, then you rent out an investment property for $30,000 a year. The 2024 to 2025 tax rate would mean that 30% of the rental income is taxed. It sounds straightforward, but let's not forget that there are a lot of expenses with your property. The biggest one being the mortgage and the interest itself. Most of these expenses are actually tax deductible. These include interest on your loan, repairs and maintenance, council and water rates, insurances, property agent fees, and best of all the depreciation on equipment, fittings, building, and the structural improvements. So normally, depreciation expenses has been paid already when you purchased the property or did improvements before, but you still get to claim this significant deduction every single year. So if all of these expenses actually end up more than your rental income, something magical happens, and this is called negative gearing. In your tax return, the losses you make counts as a tax deduction, which then reduces your total taxable income. So let's go back to our previous example. Per year, you get $100,000 from the current job. $30,000 is rental income, and let's say all the expenses for the rental expenses cost about $50,000. Instead of being taxed at $100,000, you actually get taxed as if you're earning $80,000. And with a 30% tax rate, that's $6,000 right back in your pocket. Of course, ideally, you'll have a positively geared property making a profit, but the fact that your losses can be offset puts a lot of pressure off a property that performs weaker with their rents. There are also expenses that can be claimed that are not out of pocket for the investor. Expenses like depreciation can push the rental property into a loss without affecting the cash flow for the year. Now, not to get political, but to me, this is the number one reason why property investing is so popular amongst Australians. We can't blame people for wanting to take advantage of the tax ruling that exists. Don't hate the player, hate the game. Now on to the second tax, capital gains tax, otherwise known as CGT. It's relatively simple, but basically the most funnest tax I can find because you can find simple ways to minimize this tax. If you sell something, you either make a profit or a loss. Losses, again, can be offset against your taxes. Profits gets taxed. This is how you figure out the profit. Total sales price minus the cost base. Total sale price is how much you sold it for. Pretty self-explanatory. Let's go with $1.4 million for the property. Cost base is how much you bought the property for. In this example, let's go with $1 million. Therefore, profit on $1.4 million minus $1 million is $400,000. That $400,000 then gets hit with what you call capital gains tax. Assuming no other exemptions are applied, that $400,000 is then taxed as income, and that's a lot of money. Almost half of that gets taxed. And thankfully, for investors, there are heaps of different types of concessions for CGT. The first one is the 12-month rule, where if you hold a property as an investment property for over 12 months, you get a 50% discount. The capital gains gets halved to $200,000. So in this case, instead of paying $180,000 in taxes at 45%, you pay $90,000 instead. Now, life isn't quite that simple. So here are a few common scenarios that you can relate to your personal life. What if the property that you purchased, you lived in the entire time? Well, the good news As long as it's registered as your principal place of residence and you live in it, then you don't pay any CGT at all. And what if the property was your principal place of residence half the time? A little bit more complex. Let's say you owned the property for 10 years, the first 5 years was your principal place of residence, and the second half was your investment property, and you rented it out. Most of the time, you calculate the cost base at this moment when you start renting it out, and figure out the profit from there. You do this by getting a property valuer, and generally, most effective time to do this is when you decide to rent it out. So let's say, for example, in the year 2000, you buy a property for $500,000, and in the year 2010, you decide to rent it out as an investment property. This is where you get it valued by a property valuer, and let's say they say it's $1.5 million. Then you sell it in 2020 for $2.5 million. So you'll pay CGT on $1 million instead of $2 million. Good thing is you can use the 50% discount to half the gain to $500,000 and you pay 45% tax on that $500K. There are a lot more concessions on top of that, but they generally get really complicated. So be sure to speak to an accountant before selling your property, or speak to them once you've sold your property. And I'm not saying this just to make sure you save a few $1,000s. This could save you tens or if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. I had a client come in telling me that they paid almost $500K in taxes, only for them to later realize they only needed to pay $100,000 because they lived in the property at one point of time. You don't know what you don't know, so it's best to speak to your accountant. And if you're a property developer, different rules apply. It's really complicated, so just consult a tax expert if that's the case. When you're a property developer, the main thing is that the purchase of the property is considered trading expenses. So you don't get access to capital gains tax, discounts, and all those tax concessions. The cost of the purchase and the construction cost is considered purchases and used to offset the business income. The business income will be the sale of the property and the income from that. Most business owners will have to deal with something called a GST margin. And as I mentioned, it gets quite complicated. But basically, if you're doing property development or knocking down a property to build a new property for sale, just do yourself a favor and speak to an accountant. Alright, the biggest secret to how to minimize your taxes for property investors is just never sell your properties. If you don't sell your properties, you won't get hit with a hefty tax bill due to capital gains tax. Now I'm sure you're thinking, well, how do I get the profits out of my properties for cash flow purposes? How do I spend my money? How do I live? That's where bank financing comes in. A lot of investors will receive a growth in their property prices, and then they'll take out this money by refinancing their loans. Take the $500,000 property purchase example. The property was purchased in 2010 and increased to $2.5 million in 10 years. So instead of selling the property, the owner could go back to the bank, ask them to draw out equity from the property. The bank will lend up to 80% of the value of that $2.5 million market value of the property. That is $2 million in cash. Now you take that $2 million and rinse and repeat. You purchase more property, you invest, and then you refinance back out after the growth. Obviously, most property investors do this every couple of years rather than wait 10 years for that growth. And these are the basics of taxes for property. It may seem like it's simple and easy when you see your accountant, but they're not going to know your life story. So you'll need to have these ready to make sure you get the cleanest and most effective tax returns. Keep records of your purchase contract, your loan statement, your loan agreement, legal fees,
The moon has always been an object of fascination for mankind. It's a prominent view in our night sky, a moon massive and close enough that it's beautiful and always incredible. 161 million cars. That's a lot of water. But how could such water be found on the moon, particularly as ice? Wouldn't it have evaporated out of space, particularly under the hot daytime temperatures? NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance mission recorded surface temperatures as high as 127 degrees Celsius on parts of the moon in direct sunlight. So, something is either generating the water, or something must be trapping it there. There are several hypotheses as to why this might be happening. Micrometeorites raining down on the lunar surface, carrying small amounts of water, could deposit the water on the lunar surface upon impact. Another possibility is that a two-step process whereby the sun's solar wind delivers hydrogen to the surface and causes a chemical reaction with oxygen-bearing minerals in the soil to create hydroxyl. Meanwhile, the bombardment of micrometeorites could be transforming that hydroxyl into water. It could then be trapped into tiny bead-like structures in the soil that form out of the high heat created by micrometeorite impacts. Or the water could be hidden between the grains of lunar soil and sheltered from sunlight. The LRO's observation means that the locations on the moon that might be viable for a lunar base is suddenly much wider. If this trace amount of water could silicon, calcium and magnesium.
Funniness is hard. Go ahead, comment something funny right now. Wow, well, the important thing is you try. But some people are able to be funny, even professionally. And if they're really good, and this one guy likes them, they get to write and or perform on the longest running sketch comedy TV show in the history of Earth. SNL. Historians disagree what the S and the N might stand for, but the L almost certainly stands for live, because after being written, designed, and rehearsed throughout the week, an episode of SNL is always performed live on Saturday night, satirizing politics, spoofing pop culture, roasting brands, and trying so hard not to break, but we love it when they do. Because anything could happen, it's live TV! I love to laugh. But here's a serious question. What's up with this sketch?
This is a robbery!
No one in the world seems to have noticed, but every time the cast of this bank heist scene featuring guest Josh Brolin are in front of these background pictures, there are strange roto shenanigans going on. The other shots seem fine, but the angle with the pictures? Weirdness. Sometimes the edges...
What is it? You're on video. Oh, I don't know.
They're just kind of sharp. Other times there's a distinct vibe of an AI-assisted matting tool like Magic Mask or Roto Brush on the people's silhouettes. Here it sinks particularly deep into Heidi's hair, and here it makes Bowen's fingers disappear. He needs those fingers to smack away all the Chapel Roan fans. Now, it's no secret that plenty of visual effects are used on the show. Along with live segments, SNL is famous for elaborate cinematic pre-taped sketches with top-notch VFX work. But because it's entirely produced on a crazy schedule of just a week, sometimes unfinished versions of shots or other mistakes accidentally end up on air. And in those cases, they get corrected afterwards for reruns on the web. Some of us spend months making a thing just for the web and still f*** it up. But this was definitely a live sketch, and this kind of compositing work would have had to be done in post. So, like all of you, I'm just really curious, what about these background pictures had to be fixed so badly? Yes?
Maybe copyrighted artwork was accidentally used by set design. You know, devil's advocate style.
Interesting theory, but I don't think so. I mean, these set designers know what they're doing. They've been doing it for 50 years, am I right, folks?
Come on!
Sit down! Also, zooming in closely here, we can see a roughly displaced rectangle of the superimposed art. The real picture underneath looks the same. Why would they need to painstakingly replace the pictures with the same pictures? Unless the issue wasn't the content of the pictures, but the way they looked. Maybe there were excessive reflections of lights and stuff. Of course, some newbie in the art department screwed up, laminated the posters, it looked terrible, he got fired, and then they just couldn't keep it looking amateur like that after broadcast. Based on the information available, it's as good a theory as any. Wait, I'm hearing now that the set dresser in question wasn't fired, but was merely sent home so he could reflect on his actions. Come on, guys, that was funny. For Debunk Update, I'm Captain Disillusion. Good night. Oh, don't look at me like that. I've done the best I could. What else do you want me to do? You mean communicate with a person? Okay, here I go. You got this, Captain. Hey, dude-Reno. What's good? Hope all's good. LOL. That's awesome. Sorry for never thanking you for that favor, but here's me asking for another. Nice. Can you explain the presence of Roto in this here sketch? Question. Remember to paste the URL. I remember. No worries if not. Your friend in time, Big Dog Disillusion, Esquire. And send. Wait, maybe... What? Maybe that was a bit lame? Dude, I pressed it. If I let go, it sends. Don't let go. I'll try to turn off the phone. Oh, God, and I forgot to paste the URL. Keep pressing. Pull it toward me. Okay. I mean, push it. Wait, pull or push? Just like this. Careful. You got it? Here we go now. Ah! What's wrong with you? I wasn't ready. You have destroyed my whole entire life. I'm so sorry, Captain. Please forgive me. I'm never going to be able to show my face on Earth again, and it's all your... Wait, he replied. Oh. Well, that's actually fascinating. So my contact didn't have an answer, but he did reach out to the director of the live show, and she didn't know what was changed or why either, and had to ask someone else. But eventually, an official answer was passed down. Get this. The background pictures were very different. They were originally info posters, branded with the logo of a certain company. Yeah, about that whole roasting brands thing. Under United States law, the fair use doctrine allows for the use of a trademark in a parody if it's used for commentary, criticism, news reporting, teaching, or research, even if it would otherwise be considered trademark infringement. But it can be tricky, so most comedy shows tend to err on the side of caution and substitute fake, sound-alike brand names to make fun of. So click on this link for more legal regal, or I'll see you at His Majesty's court. But SNL is the big leagues. With an established reputation, years of precedence, and collaborative relationships with many businesses, they're not afraid to use real brand names when it's called for.
Alexa, search Amazon Go Store Black Man Trash.
Amazon Go. No lines, no checkout.
Still, there are situations when even their use of a brand is deemed questionable. Like, for example, if they stage an entire bank robbery hostage situation that turns kinky at a Chase branch. Maybe they were taking a fair use swing. Maybe Chase was a sponsor of the show that week. Maybe Lorne Michaels is little Joshua Piccadilly Morgan Chase's godfather. These are questions we simply don't have answers to because I'm not messaging Mike again. What we do know is that post-broadcast, someone somewhere in the hierarchy tasked an overworked VFX artist to rush out some last-minute fixes. Because you see, it wasn't just the posters. We were so busy looking at them, we forgot to check everywhere else. There was a giant Chase logo over the automated ATM teller machine and on the glass door. Even the exterior facade was probably a real Chase building. And why did they blur this name tag? It just said Jonathan. Almost every shot contained a branded element, so most likely after a complaint from the company, each logo had to be meticulously scrubbed from the footage and replaced with the generic and legally approved Metro Capital Bank name. But guess what? They missed a spot. In some shots, this sign on the door behind Devon is either completely removed or just blanked out. But here, as it cuts to the wide, they forgot to paint it out at all. I can clearly see the Chase service mark sphincter. Oh no! What an unfortunate oversight. Now, despite the company's best PR efforts and making SNL do a bunch of extra work, over 2.5 million people will know that the fictional robbery took place at a JP Morgan Chase subsidiary. Nobody look at it. Get it out of here. Go.
Now, wait just a minute, Captain.
What is it?